The stone passage, room number 7, contains vivid and narrating paintings from the time of Christian IV and his successor Frederick III. Let's start by focusing on a painting that says the world about Christian IV and a great deal perhaps about midlife crisis in general. The painting shows Kirsten Monk, who was married at the age of 16 to the 38-year-old King Christian IV. And by following the chain held by Kirsten, you get a good idea of the rather lustful traits of the king, since it leads indiscreetly all the way down to his lower regions. Kirsten Monk may not have been the sharpest tool in the shed, if we are to believe some sources, but whatever was said about her, she did indeed manage to capture the attention of the king, with whom she had no less than 12 children. The prevalent explanation as to where Rosenborg got its name is very romantic in its nature. The rose was, and still is, ascribed to love, which in turn was specifically appropriate since the coat of arms of Kirsten Monk contained 3 roses, making it a proper lover's nest. We cannot know for certain though. All we do know is that in a certain letter, Christian IV signed off with his signature, the date of writing and an extra little Rosenborg. Due to her mother's scheming, the marriage of the somewhat younger Kirsten to the king was arranged in much the same fashion as she herself was married off to a noble at the age of 17. She could certainly be described as a grey eminence, since she was in charge of large estates and considerable fortunes, and widowed by 2 husbands. Christian IV had a good long run, but his luck ran out in his catastrophic defeat in the 30 Years' War, and soon hereafter his relationship with Kirsten Monk also worsened. Just before the peace negotiations started, she refused him access to her bedchamber, and this was possibly because she had an affair with a German nobleman, seen in the bottom left corner, an affair that produced an illegitimate daughter. Their marriage ended rather abruptly, and it involved both parties throwing insults back and forth, and ended with the king's refusal to let Kirsten see their children. The mother of Kirsten Monk then introduced a mistress to King Christian IV in the hope this would create an impression of an adulterating king instead. Her scheming didn't pan out exactly as she thought, since no one really cared about the mistress, and furthermore this new mistress and the king fell in love and spent their lives together until his death. Vibeke, as she was called, died shortly after. Having lost both her place at court and her honor, Kirsten tried to influence how history would come to judge her, by claiming that the last word on the dying king's lips was her name, a final attempt to regain some of her lost prestige. If we turn our attention now to the next king, Frederick III, firstly we have a very descriptive picture called the Homage of 1660, a ceremony that was to celebrate the newly instituted absolute monarchy. Moreover, the painting gives us a very good impression of Copenhagen at the time. And if you look closely, you might even find the painter himself waving his hat in the bottom left corner. The build-up to the institution of absolutism was dominated by wars against the neighboring country Sweden. Frederick III, like many of his predecessors, had claims on Sweden and therefore saw his chance to enforce these claims at a time when the Swedish army was occupying Poland. The only problem was that the Swedish armies turned their noses northwards, marched all the way to Jutland, and even marched from the mainland over the frozen waters and straits, and invaded almost all of Denmark, a military feat of great proportions. The following year, however, their greed got to them, and they tried to storm the capital, exemplified by this picture of the assault of Copenhagen, a battle they lost. The Danes managed to defeat the Swedes with the assistance of especially the Dutch, but this didn't stop Frederick III from claiming the spoils of victory for himself. He is, for instance, seen in this picture at the only major Danish victory during the wars, even though he was nowhere near the scene at the time. Through such events, he gained more leverage for him to use against the Danish aristocracy, making it possible for him to institute the absolute monarchy.